Welcome. Thank you all for being here. I am Nancy Manning, Executive Director of Tennessee Citizens for Wilderness Planning, and I have a message from Board President Mark Bevelheimer, who could not be here today because one of his very dear friends from his home in Indiana passed away, so he's up there celebrating her life. But he wanted to have me say thank you very much for your years of generosity, support, volunteer time, expertise, and thank you for coming today to help us celebrate 60 years of TCWP. All right, well, looking around the room, I see a lot of longtime members, new members, new board members, and friends that are just getting to know TCWP. And for the new folks, we're especially glad you're here. We encourage you to visit with any of the longtime members. They all have stories to tell, and they're the reason this organization has remained strong for 6 decades. Now, let's get the party started, all right? It is my great pleasure to introduce Ace Russell. I just want to say that I met Ace for the first time last year on our inaugural hike of our newest Obed Wild and Scenic River property we call Ramsey Creek. And Ace was kind enough to help me navigate some very rough terrain. I was really surprised. He was right there to help, which goes to show you the Russell family is all about kindness. So please join me in welcoming Ace. Yay.
Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi, happy 60th, right? Good to see you all, many familiar faces and many new ones too. In 1966, something galvanized Bill and Lee Russell and their friends, and here we are. When Nancy asked me to speak about those days, I told her, I don't know nothing about birthing babies or birthing organizations. I haven't been a working member of TCWP, but we do have speakers today who can fill us in on the amazing history and current projects. So I'm glad for that. I'm just a guilty consumer of the good policies and the wild places you guys have protected. But I was there when TCWP was birthed, and I am considered an expert on Bill and Lee by my sister Abby, who I also consider to be an expert. So we'll talk about what we know. We're going to start off with short bios of our parents and stories from our past. Their scientific work can be found online, and their contributions to TCWP are in the newsletter and on the website. Abby and I knew Lee and Bill as Mama and Daddy, and we have a good reason to share these more intimate memories today. I'll get to that reason in a minute. Bill, William, was British, with stiff upper lip, dry sense of humor, polite, and friendly but not too close, please, independent flavor of drink. He took a proper, direct path from his early student days, a straight line through to a career as a geneticist. He was the younger of 2 brothers whose father was the local pharmacist. In small town England in those days, the pharmacist was also the dentist, a general store owner, and jack of all trades. Bill's heroes were modern-day explorers, Amundsen and Scott, Hillary and Norgay. In the early 1930s, in his early 20s, he graduated from Oxford and left his home on the south coast of England to spend a year at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Instead of just 1 year, he spent the next 70 here. To get familiar with America, Bill hitchhiked to the west coast and back, visiting national parks along the way. He was hooked. Lee, Liana, was the eldest of 3 children in a Jewish family that lived in an upper middle class apartment in the heart of Vienna. She loved the city itself, but even more the parks, hills, and mountains the family visited in all seasons. She was proud of learning to ski, cross country, and bike. Her father was a chemist who owned a business with international connections.
It was those connections that allowed the family to escape the Holocaust. When Lee was 14, after the Nazis marched into Vienna with cheering crowds welcoming them. Our grandfather essentially traded the business for their freedom with the self-serving help of a relatively friendly SS officer. They talked themselves into describing him as, quote, not really a Nazi at heart. The family took everything they could carry and left the rest behind. Lee spent the first part of the war in England, including the Blitz bombing campaign, and then sailed to New York in 1941. Our parents met in Maine in 1943, where Bill had settled down as a research biologist. Lee was a college student in New York City, toying with becoming either a writer or a medical doctor. She took a summer job at the National Lab where Bill worked on Mount Desert Island. She fell in love with genetics research, with the island, and with Bill, and he with her. For a time, they lived in a primitive lakeside cabin, no electricity. It's true there were days when she would probably have preferred to have a nice, simple lunch than settle down with a detective novel and a nap. And there was at least one occasion, Evie can help me on this one later, when Lee did not want to play on Bill's team, and it almost got physical. We'll tell you about that.
In preparing for my comments today, I wondered how I could explain what drew our parents to the founding of TCWP. It was a time of cultural change and citizen activism, but if I had to choose a single word, it would be outrage. They bristled with outrage when people were talking about putting a huge power line through our backyard greenbelt, a road across the Smokies, or a dam on the Ovid River. Their love of nature made them want to fight. I didn't really think of them as fighters before the mid-60s, but these assaults on the things that they loved boiled their blood and made them take up the cause. They went beyond simply defeating the bad ideas. They sought to make the defeats permanent. I want to say a special word about Lee to the women here today, really to everyone. She was a trailblazer in both her careers, but it didn't come naturally or easily for her. She grew up shy. In her autobiography, she takes a long look back at her childhood diaries, and she's critical of herself. Quote, having led a comfortable and settled young life myself, I had the luxury of advocating for the unfortunates of the world, whose problems I did not really understand. But I also analyzed my failings. I was inhibited, worried about being sentimental. I was shy, self-conscious, and had a false sense of pride. That's how her sister, Aunt Gerda, described her too. 60 plus years ago, things were even more difficult for women than nowadays, way more. We saw it when we traveled with our parents to various scientific conferences that they combined with our vacations, all over America, Canada, Europe, South America. The first time I watched Lee deliver a scientific talk, I can't remember where, it was probably mid-1950s, a report on her early research, to an audience full of fellow biologists. As I looked out over the auditorium, it was all dark suits and ties, only 2 or 3 splashes of color. And her voice was weak, wavering, and cracked, like mine today. After a few years of noteworthy research, affirming and well-publicized, you can see some pictures I brought today of her, a story in Life magazine that the famous female photographer Margaret Brooke White took of her in 1965. So, well, I'm sorry, 1956. She was well publicized. And a few more women in the audience, she finally found her voice. And she found it again years later when she visited the good folks in their homes on the plateau, miners and farmers, the voices of Sachem, save our Cumberland Mountains. She fought alongside them for strict mining reforms. ORNL, Oak Ridge National Labs, created a research award program in our mother's name for outstanding young candidates, especially for promising female and minority scientists. Its stated intent was to attract a workforce that's diverse. Is that really a bad word these days?
Lee was honored by this program, and I've heard some of the young women recipients voice their gratitude as they deliver strong speeches about their work. So things have changed. You're not going to get the same salary as men, you know you're going to be overlooked for promotions. What you can do is get your foot in the door now, and then outperform. Outperform. Outperform everybody. Outperform even your own personal goals. Lee's father told her as a youngster that women can do anything men can do. He turned out to be right. She proved him right. So I talked enough, and this is a lot more interesting to me than to you because it's my life too, obviously. But to step back, East Tennessee 60 years ago was poised to participate in improvements that would have destroyed forever many of the unspoiled and beautiful places that we love. Without pushback, that would have happened. Economic-only concerns would have marched in and we would have welcomed them. I find it amazing that big things can be accomplished. Long-standing structures can be altered by simple acts of a single person or a small group that has a vision of what's possible and commits to a direction of action. That's the reason we want to share these personal memories with you. We want to humanize this history. History can be written by us, each of us. A human with human dreams and human foibles is capable of agency. And when people band together to advance a worthwhile cause, it's good. Allow me to introduce my sister, Debbie.
So I'm going to continue on in the personal vein. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
And first of all, I'd like to apologize. Earlier this year, I had a pretty substantial plumbing leak at my house, and lots of stuff got piled into boxes, and now a couple of rooms are crammed full of those, piled up to the ceiling, like Jenga blocks. Unfortunately, those boxes contain some wonderful photos of members from TCWP. People on outings, people at meetings, at parties, canoeing, hiking. Some of those people are here in this room still, Jenny and Phil Chandler. Unfortunately, I didn't have them though, so I'm sorry. I would have liked to have shared them with you. And I'm sorry that I can't. Also, I'd like to say that my mom and dad weren't the only people who started this organization, who founded it. There was also Dick Lorenz, and there was another organization just being born at that time, the Tennessee Scenic Rivers Association, whose founding member, Bob Miller, was a close friend and ally of TCWP. The year that TCWP was founded, I was a 13-year-old, self-absorbed teenage brat who didn't have much interest at all in what my mom and dad were doing. So when Nancy asked me whether I'd like to speak about those early years, perhaps share some stories, my first thought was, crap, I can't remember any. The thing is, though, I found that I would like to tell you one personal story from those years. Something profound I learned then, and that stuck with me all my life. And that today makes me so happy that after 60 years, this organization continues advocating for wild places, educating citizens and politicians alike, and being a steward for the lands that it's protected. By the time TCWP was 2 years old, I was a little older too, a little less self-absorbed, and quite a bit more interested in the world. Lots was happening in 1968. This country was fighting a war in Vietnam. Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy were assassinated. There was a pitched battle in the streets of Chicago between police and protesters at the Democratic National Convention. I was not yet old enough to vote, but I was passionately against the war because I was young. I had a lot of energy to put into that. And because I was young, I was entirely sure that what I thought was right was indeed right. The people of good faith couldn't possibly disagree with me. It was simply a matter of black and white, heroes and villains. I think I must have been pretty much insufferable. But my mom, after weeks and months of patiently listening to me rant about how horrible this country was, leaned over to me one day and said quietly, "But the thing that's absolutely amazing about this country is that if you feel that way, you have the freedom to actually do something about it." TCWP, to put it very simply, started at the grassroots because there was a small group of people who cared enough about 3 or 4 specific things to work together and actually do something about them. They learned how as they went along, and it was amazing what they accomplished, what you've accomplished. Eventually, because of my mom's comment, I started looking at the world more broadly. After a while, I realized that what the early members of TCWP did, banding together to accomplish shared objectives, is simply something that human beings tend to do in free societies. Think of all the voluntary associations in this country. People of all ages, backgrounds, values, conditions are constantly uniting to accomplish all sorts of things. And the fact that we do this is valuable in many ways beyond any particular set of goals. In fact, it's a hallmark of and absolutely foundational to the survival of democracy. People relying on themselves to overcome obstacles and to build the things that they value. It's a mindset of independence, strength, responsibility, and the collective power of individuals. It's a mindset that doesn't simply blame others or expect the government to take care of us or solve all of our problems. My mom was an immigrant who'd had experience living in societies that weren't so free, societies where individual will and like-minded groups were crushed. Here, she found a system that's tailor-made for freedom of action and freedom of association. She saw a beautiful river and wanted to save it, and she also saw that other people might want that too, and that they might actually be able to do it together. So my mom saw all that, but I don't know whether she ever predicted all the intangible rewards that would come with the doing of it. That she would form such deep, lifelong friendships, or that she would feel proud of herself for facing what to her were the terrors, persuading, sometimes angry opponents, and influencing sometimes ruthless politicians. Or that she would experience that rare pleasure of being part of a group, working towards a mutual purpose. People sharing energy and excitement, sometimes living through failure, but also sharing success. That's a heady pleasure. That's worth a great deal. So she's gone now, but 60 years later, there are still all of you voluntarily banding together to achieve your shared goals, accomplishing many of them and keeping our free society, our democracy vital. Right on. Go TCWP. Her comment to me so long ago, and the way she said it, so quietly, smiling to herself at our amazing good fortune, it stuck with me. Thank you.
I've been a public speaker in my career for a long time, and I want everybody to be able to hear. Jimmy Groton, can you hear?
Yes, ma'am.
It's good? Are you telling? So, okay. You're welcome, Nancy. Nice to meet you. I might as well get this out of the way, because I can't talk about this organization without acknowledging Lee and Bill. They were beloved friends of my family right up until the day before Lee died. And now I have the privilege of having Evie and Ace, primarily Evie because she lives in her childhood home, which is a mile from us, so I get to see Evie. So the relationship with the Russell family continues. Thank you very much to both of you. This is a personal story because TCWP enriched me I'm going to talk to you about 3 ways that was true in my life. I was involved with TCWP for about 40 years, either as a director or on the board. But I feel like I didn't give to the organization nearly as much as the organization gave to me in 3 ways. Number 1, it gave me the opportunity to make a difference in issues that I was passionate about. Number 2, it introduced me to a raft of giant environmental protection people. I would never have met folks, some of you in this room, had TCWP not opened those doors to me. And number 3, it taught me the joy of celebration. The opportunities that I enjoyed under TCWP's leadership, working with TSRA, working with Sierra Club and other organizations, there are 3. One was Bill Allen, my now husband, who couldn't be here today, much to his sorrow. And Bill says to tell everyone hello. Bill and I wrote a grant to the Lyndhurst Foundation in the early 90s to study the water quality and recreational values of East Tennessee streams and rivers. That grant went on to fund a raft of organizations doing an assessment that was sent to the state for future use. The second opportunity that TCWP gave me was to keep golf courses out of some of our iconic state parks. Doris Gove and I were seasonal naturalists in the state park system in the mid-70s. Hi, Doris. Doris was at Norris State Park. I was at Cove Lake State Park. Doris and I both understood the importance of state parks to all Tennesseans, not just people who want to pay to play golf. So I was passionate about that issue. Now, the third issue that is a real heart issue for me, Bobby Fulcher called me one day. Who in this room has ever been able to say no to Bobby Fulcher? If you are there, let me know. And Bobby called me one day and he said in his beguiling voice, "Jenny, do you think TCWP would help protect 6,000 acres adjoining Pickett State Park and Forest?" I said, "Bobby, I think they would. I'm on the board, I'll go talk to them." So I went to the board, I presented the issue, may have had Bobby come speak, I can't remember. And of course they said, "Yes, go on, Jenny, let's do that." They were working on big issues, you know, the OBED, the big South Fork, these big issues of protecting East Tennessee lands and waters. I like the little niche issues that this one was. Well, Bobby and I went to work and back and forth for a year, 2 years, and we were finally able to get that land transferred into protected status. And that Christmas party that year, this was in the late 90s, Bobby brought me a little piece of that pink plastic tape that they wrap around trees that are going to be cut. He brought me a little piece of that and he said, "This tree is still alive." So I put it on my Christmas tree every year. And I think about that opportunity. The second thing that how TCWP enriched my life and is still doing that, is the raft of people that I got to meet. People like Ruth Neff to Tennessee Environmental Council, Don Barger, Jimmy Groton, Doris Gove, Will Skelton, Matt Pritchard. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And there I was. I'm not a scientist or an engineer, but TCWP accepted my gifts and they let me work with those gifts. And do you know what I was thinking on the way over here? I had a career, 32-year career in a heavy scientific industry of nuclear waste management. TCWP gave me the confidence to use my skills, no science, no engineering, but to use my skills to do what I could do in my career. And that taught me, that experience helped me be successful in my career. We're so thankful. I don't think I would have married Bill Allen if it hadn't been for this one. Shopper meeting, he's a great guy. The third way that TCWP enriched my life is recognizing the gift of celebration, so thank you for doing this. Thank you all for helping organize this, to celebrate this wonderful, mighty little organization. You know, we used to celebrate a lot in the 90s. Don, you'll remember setting up a tent out at Annetta Watson and Bob Luxmore's farm out in Solomon Hollow. We celebrated milestone birthdays for Lee, and they lived a long time. Milestone birthdays for Bill. We celebrated milestone wedding anniversaries. We celebrated achievements that the organization or that SOCM had done. We'd set up a big tent in the middle of August, and everybody would bring food and coolers and kids, and it was so much fun. So the gift of celebration was important because the work was hard. The work was very hard, but those celebrations gave us a time to congratulate each other, to hug each other, and then go back out and face what we needed to do our work. I think that's all I wanted to say, except to say a big thank you to all of you who are working so hard to keep it all going. And if Bill and I ever quit traveling, I'm not sure when that'll be, surely. Anyway, if we ever quit traveling, there might be the chance that I could become more active in the organization. Thank you very much.
So much of what we do as kids, what we love to do as kids, especially with our parents, influences our later lives. Our next speaker used to tool around town with her mother in a purple conversion van, visiting piles of trash on the street, finding things that deserved another chance at life. The problems of waste and the health of our planet have been her focus ever since. She runs a refillery and sustainability business right here in South Knox, just 3 miles down the road, that addresses waste head on. And along the way to where she is now, she got a PhD in civil engineering. Her most recent methods of confronting trash are well thought out and put into action. She's the kind of person our parents would have loved to work with. Michaela Barnett.
I will also do this so that you all can hear. I do love talking trash, any opportunity that I get to. And my love for our planet has been a lifelong motivating force since I was scouring trash piles by the side of the road with my mom as a kid. And then in high school, I started multiple recycling programs, and I'm pretty sure my teachers during field days, they were like, Michaela, please stop sorting trash into recycling and trash. You can go play with the other youths. But I want to talk a little bit about the forces that we are up against when it comes to protecting this beautiful planet of ours and the natural spaces that make East Tennessee so very special. And I actually think that our biggest opponent is not just corporations who, unfettered, would take every bit of our natural resources and strain and drain them for a little bit of profit, nor is it just politicians who would let them through their failure of leadership, nor is it apathy. It is people's belief that they can't make a difference. It is people's misplaced belief that they have no power. I see this a lot in my creative problem solving that I am engaged in currently, where folks will say, I'm one person and I can't make a difference. I think there are quite a lot of interests that have invested quite heavily to make them believe the lie that they do not have power. When I did my dissertation research focused on waste management perceptions, one of the questions that I asked participants, I laid out an entire supply chain from resource extraction, product design, manufacturing, transportation, consumption, end of life, and I asked them 2 questions. The first question was, where in this cycle do you think efforts should focus to minimize environmental harm of these products? And the second question I asked was, where do you as an individual think you can focus to solve these problems? Now, a lot of my other research focused on the fact that our perceptions about what effective environmental actions are wrong, right? And I build on an entire body of research from one of my mentors and heroes, Dr. Shazeen Atari, who did similar research in water and energy, and she asked people, what are the most effective things that we can do? And almost everyone talks about individual behaviors that are focused on curtailment, not efficiency, right? So I can turn off the tap when I'm brushing my teeth instead of installing a low flow shower head. I can turn off the lights when I leave rather than transitioning to LEDs, right? A lot of lay people have misperceptions about what effective actions we can take versus the actions that we actually do take. So transferring this to waste management research, I really wanted to see, does everyone just think that recycling is the most effective action they can take rather than reduction and reuse, which we know we have to do upstream, and rather than systems change, where we know that we need corporations to take more responsibility for the packaging they're introducing into our lives? A lot of my research did show that, but this one question in particular really challenged some of my conceptions, because over 80% of people correctly identified that to solve these problems, we have to go upstream. We need to focus on product design and resource extraction. But when you ask them what they can do about it, almost every single person says, the only way I can make a difference is where I choose to put a product in the waste stream, whether I choose to recycle it or throw it away or compost it or burn or bury it in my backyard. What my research showed me is that in a lot of cases, people do understand that we need systems change, but they don't feel like they have any power to change our system. Now, as someone that has been working in the climate and environment space for a really long time, I went through this journey myself, going from someone who just harangued my husband anytime he brought single-use plastics into my house, and who focused all my time on making my own bread and my own tofu and cooking my beans from scratch so that I could avoid single-use plastic packaging and waste, to starting a small business where folks can come and refill products ranging from teas, spices, coffees, shampoo, anything you get in a single-use container, you can now get it in bulk by the ounce. And instead of spending all my time and energy harassing my husband and making things from scratch, I put that energy into a small business that now serves over 8,000 people in East Tennessee, helping them reduce their reliance on this single-use plastic system. We, the people, have more power than we realize, which is why these corporate interests and politicians spend so much time and energy trying to convince us of exactly the opposite. And organizations like the one we're celebrating today are so important because they give us proof of concept that a small group of engaged citizens who refuse to believe the lie that they don't have power can change the world for the better. And in fact, it's the only thing that ever has. So thank you for inviting me to share space with you today. And let's continue being the use case that proves to everyone in our lives that we have power to change the world. We just have to take it and stop believing the lies that we can't make a difference. All right?
Thank you.
My next job is to introduce Bill Chandler, who preceded me as executive director. And Bill was working, I'm not sure who he was working for. This was the mid-'70s, and I'm from Memphis. I'm a Delta girl. And I had landed in East Tennessee in 1975 to go to the University of Tennessee in the School of Forestry, Wildlife, and Fisheries. And so someone suggested that I meet Bill Chandler. I said, great. So I went to meet Bill. Do you remember, Bill? You were in that office in the old stadium on the first floor.
No.
Anyway, I went to meet Bill and we talked more, and he said, so you're going to school? I said, yeah. He said, you want a part-time job being executive director of TCWP? And he described the job, and I said, yeah, I'd love that, because I had just worked in Memphis keeping I-40 out of Overton Park.
Yeah.
So I was still gung-ho. So he said, well, go to Oak Ridge, meet Lee and Bill and the board, and see what you think. Well, after getting lost in Oak Ridge, I finally found them and got the job. So Bill Chandler is beloved to me because of that link to this organization. And I'm not even going to go into all of his qualifications. So, Bill?
Four beautiful presentations, but I have to say, Ace, you get the quote of the day for Michaela fighting the trash. I think that sort of went by a little fast. But, Michaela's webpage, the environment section, starts with the statement, East Tennessee is one of the most beautiful places in the world. And Jeannie, I am also from the western part of the state. I moved here and fell in love with the mountains. Went to work in Oak Ridge in 1972 at what later became the Institute for Energy Analysis. It was maybe the first energy and climate think tank. And I had a beautiful view of the Cumberlands from the Oriole campus in Oak Ridge, and soon started noticing these scars up on the hillsides. It looked like road construction, except the roads didn't go anywhere. They were just shoving dirt and trees and everything down onto whoever was below in the streams. And so it upset me. I wanted to do something about it. And this is how I came to meet the Russells. One Saturday morning, I drove with a colleague to the Morgan County Courthouse where there was a hearing being held on a permit for a strip mine. And lo and behold, Lee and Bill were there, and they were testifying against this permit being issued to a mine that would have affected Frozen Head State Park. And they were, I forget who was testifying, it was probably Lee. But the testimony was very calm and well thought out and scientifically based. And I was 25, I'd never seen anything like this. So I said, I have to meet these people. So I hitched a ride with them back through the mountains from Morgan County to Oak Ridge, and they told me about this organization called TCWP. And so it was a few months later, maybe a year, Lee came to me and she said, how'd you like to take a salary cut and give up health insurance and come to work for us? And I said, oh yeah, you betcha. And so in 1976, I went to work for TCWP, and the first thing I had to do was to figure out what it was I was supposed to do. And that was part of figuring out what the organization was really meant to be. I assumed that the board had hired me to take some of the load off the Russells, because even in those days, Lee was writing a 20-page newsletter, single-spaced, tiny font.
Typewriter.
And so I could write, so I proposed to Lee that I would write the next newsletter. And I think that was the shortest conversation I've ever had. I don't remember exactly what she said, but I think it was, no thanks. So then I thought, okay, what can we do? The board wants me to expand the membership and to raise funds. I started looking around at the needs of the region, and trash was everywhere, litter was everywhere. There was no recycling in East Tennessee. So I suggested that maybe we should work on sponsoring a bottle bill, deposits on cans and bottles. And Bill took me aside and said, well, you know, you have to pick your battles. TCWP was created to prevent the destruction of some of these treasures, like the sandstone gorge of the Ovid River and the Big South Fork area and Columbia River. And he didn't say it in these words, but it occurred to me later throughout my career, this question of, do you want to be big or do you want to be good? And so what TCWP could already do was use scientifically trained volunteers and a core of dedicated supporters to work on those things that they had already started. So we arrived at that point that the thing that I should do is work on helping to control surface mining, because that, after all, was how we met. And surface mining threatened everything. So I probably traveled 2 dozen times to Washington to lobby for along with Save Our Cumberland Mountains, who are my heroes. In fact, Don, I think I first met J.W. Bradley at that same hearing. So it was a good day in August of 1977, the 3rd of August, I think, that I was invited to the White House to represent TCWP for the signing of the Strip Mining Control and Reclamation Act. It was a bad day. A couple of years later, when Jimmy Carter himself undermined that law by firing all the people who were enforcing the law. He was having to run for re-election. He was afraid he was going to lose the coal states, and he lost anyway. But it was not the last time, as you know, that we pushed a boulder up the hill, only to watch it roll down again. But I do hope that maybe just maybe, if we elect the right people, we can push the rocks up there and keep them for a while. I want to share with you a story about Bill and Lee and the honor of working with them. In 1976, when I started, Bill was awarded the Enrico Fermi Award, which was the highest scientific prize awarded by the Atomic Energy Commission, which later became the Department of Energy. And then put Bill in the category of people like J. Robert Oppenheimer, who won that prize, and Leysen Meitner, who co-discovered nuclear fission. And so it was a great honor, and there was a ceremony at the Cosmos Club in Washington, which was a club composed of eminent scientists and literary people. And it happened in 1976, 77, to be all male. And it also happened to have a rule that if you came to the Cosmos Club and you were female, you had to go in the side door. So Lee, when she attended the ceremony honoring Bill, had to go in the side door. And of course, not quite 20 years later, she won the Fermi Award herself for her work on the genetic effects of ionizing radiation. And she went in the front door. So this is Lee. Can you hear me? Yes. Lee and President Clinton's science advisor, Jack Gibbons, who many of you know. He was a stalwart in TCWP. He and Mary donated over 450 acres of their Ovid River property to the park. Half of it TCWP still owns. So this was Jack welcoming Lee to the White House. He took her to meet Vice President Gore in his office with Bill. I think we have one more, do we?
No, I don't have.
No, that's it.
I got to mention on this slide on the right,
Evie has been cropped out because she didn't like her outfit. It's not appropriate for meeting Al Gore.
I remember that Al Gore was smiling very large in the end, so I don't think he noticed. And also denim shirts are fine. So Dan Robbins, spectacular career in analytical chemistry in Oak Ridge, managed the laboratory that served all of the major installations in Oak Ridge. And then, in his spare time, founded the Oak Ridge Greenways organization and was involved with that in the later years, maybe longer, as chairman. And when he retired, there was a resolution from the city of Oak Ridge congratulating him on having helped create 85 miles of greenway in Oak Ridge.
Yeah.
In 1967, I arrived in Oak Ridge together with my wife and 2-year-old daughter, both Norwegian citizens. And the next year, I saw in the newspaper that some organization with strange initials, TC something, TCW something, were going on a hike to see Hidden Falls, I think up on the plateau. In fact, that may have been a picture of it, waterfall that we saw earlier. So I signed up. Fortunately, there was a Jeep along. I think it was Dave Cuneo's Jeep. And since my wife was pregnant and I had a 3-year-old daughter, we were allowed to ride in the Jeep. And other people were hiking along. The Jeep moved at the same pace as the hikers. It wasn't a road, it was barely a path, and it had been raining, and so it was terribly, terribly muddy. And the Jeep would get stuck, and so Dave would get out and pull the winch out from under the front of the Jeep and wrap it around a tree and pull us out. After several times of that, it didn't work anymore. We were so stuck, it couldn't pull us out. And so he said, well, you're just going to have to walk the rest of the way. I can back it up, but you'll have to walk the rest of the way. So my 3-year-old daughter and my pregnant wife and I start walking, and pretty soon my 3-year-old daughter's holding Leanne's hand, and my daughter decided she didn't want to go any further, so Lee picked her up and carried her the entire way to Hidden Falls. And now my 3-year-old daughter, 40-some years later, is on the board of TCW. I had founded the Greenways organization in 1993 at the request of Oak Ridge City Council. And Lee came to me and said, you know, TCWP has North Ridge Trail. Would you consider that becoming part of Greenways? And I said, of course. And so the North Ridge Trail became the oldest greenway in our system, which, as he said, is now 85 miles of greenways. I, not long ago, retired from the city's Recreation and Parks Advisory Committee. And before I retired, I introduced a motion to rename the North Ridge Trail the Lee and Bill Russell North Ridge Trail, because I was afraid that younger people in Oak Ridge wouldn't recognize that name or who they were. Sure enough, several board members said, who are they? And so I got Ray Smith's article that appeared in the Oak Ridger that highlighted Leanne's and Bill's career, and the things that you've heard about from their children and some of the other speakers. And so that became the oldest greenway. When I used to go to parties at Jenny Freeman's house, Leanne would come up to me and stick this hearing device in my face so she could hear me. And now through the wonders of technology and $7,000, I stick my hearing device in somebody's face every time I'm trying to hear them. So thank you for listening to my remembrance of Lee. I often think about her when I'm doing the Lee motion.
Our next storyteller is Don Marger, and I will tell you that when I first came here and obtained this position, Don is one of the first people that I met, and every single time I speak with Don or visit with him in person, he always has a TCWP story to tell, and they're always great, and I'm sure you're going to hear some of them. The one thing that you won't see up on this slide, one accomplishment, is that during the National Park Service Centennial in 2016, Don was recognized as one of the 100 most influential people in the history of Great Smoky Mountains National Park.
Yes, I am a storyteller. I'm known for that. I've rarely been known to tell a story in less than 10 minutes. So out of respect for you and because Nancy will whip me if I do otherwise, I've decided to go ahead and write down what I wanted to say. I'm normally extemporaneous. I like to do this. But in fact, I'm also, to most of the speakers that you've already heard, I'm kind of known as a newcomer. I've only been involved with TCWP for about 40 years. Right? So, that began in 1983 when I took a job as a community organizer with Save Our Cumberland Mountains. You've heard several people talk about that organization. It was formed in '72, and I was an ardent backpacker, so I thought saving mountains sounded like a good idea, right? I had no idea what rural community organizing in the Cumberland Mountains was, or what that would entail. Nor, I had even less knowledge of what our sister organization, the Tennessee Citizens for Wilderness Planning, what wilderness planning meant in relation to someone who goes out and backpacks. And so I had 8 years that were the best education that no money could buy. Working with Coalfield Citizens in the Cumberlands, I soon got involved with what turned out to be the very first designation of lands unsuitable for mining. Under the '77 law that Bill talked about, that he was at the ceremony that created that law, it took them several years to get that law up, have all the lawsuits back and forth, write the regulations, have the lawsuits over those, get the implementation going. But that law had a particular provision in it, Section 522, that allowed anyone who is or may be adversely affected to file an administrative petition to have an area declared off limits to surface mining before it was destroyed. Bingo, wilderness planning. All of a sudden, I realized, wait a minute, this goes to the source, right, Michaela? This takes you to where the problem is at the beginning. And I found 2 organizations, one of which I was working for, the other of which I was working closely with, that were doing exactly that. Turned out that a Morgan County school teacher by the name of Don Todd with TCWP had, back when the state had the program in the early 1980s, had already filed exactly that kind of petition for the area adjacent to Frozen Head State Park. The state lost the program. Governor Lamar Alexander got really mad at him. The program went back to the federal government. And so years later, they had to refile that petition with the new management of the Office of Surface Mining. In the meantime, I was working with a group of people that were affected by surface mining, and in September of 1984, we filed the first petition with the Office of Surface Mining and successfully got the Rock Creek watershed down in Bledsoe County designated. That whole thing helped me understand that I was suddenly in an organization that was in the same enterprise with TCWP. I met Lee, I met members of TCWP, and I realized I'm not really working for any organization. I'm working for the land, and I'm working for the people. In working these two petitions, both the Rock Creek watershed and the Frozen Head, it was the Flat Fork petition for the Flat Fork area adjacent to Frozen Head. Both of them were successful. And I got to know Lee and Bill. I got to know Lee really well. I got to be introduced to the thing that would change my life, the TCWP newsletter, which you've heard. I've always been amazed that when I went over to see Bill and Lee at this baby grand piano in the living room, because every single newsletter from any environmental organization in Tennessee and way beyond were stacked up on the top of that piano, right? And Lee would read, digest, condense, illuminate, and then illustrate how you can participate in protecting things. That was the TCWP newsletter. Meanwhile, I was getting a different kind of education because I was offered a job with the Environmental Policy Institute in DC. I'd been involved with mining issues, and they needed a director for their Citizens Mining Project. So I went up to DC for 2 years and wanted nothing more than to get back home and work with the people and the places that I loved. I was sitting in my DC office doing what I always did, which is read my TCWP newsletter, when I discovered the ad that said that the National Parks Conservation Association, a prominent national organization founded in 1919 in the Cosmos Club, was looking for a brand new Southeast Regional Director. The only trick was you had to live somewhere near the Great Smoky Mountains. 2 months later, I was sitting in my new office, which was a spare back bedroom in a friend's house in Norris, with my new computer, my new laptop, my new phone, and the phone rang. I have no idea how she even got the number, but it was Lee Russell. Don, there's a management plan going on at the Obed Wild and Scenic River. You need to be there. And like everyone else, I said, yes, ma'am. There's about 15 10-minute stories that I could tell you now, but I'm going to focus on two because I think those two illustrate exactly why TCWP's existence 60 years on is really a reason to celebrate. The first one is the final lands unsuitable for mining petition. I filed this, and that I had filed in almost 40 years involvement in this, the North Cumberland Wildlife Management Area petition. It protected much of the headwaters of the Big South Fork National River and Recreation Area. I worked with Attorney Deborah Murray with the Southern Environmental Law Center. We first filed a petition for the entire New River watershed upstream from the Big South Fork. And the Bush administration at that time spat it back in our face without even processing it. They weren't going to consider it. We then realized that since the state owned the surface, not the minerals, but they owned all the surface of this area, that the state, under the law, could be a petitioner. They were effectively a person who is or may be adversely affected. This had never been done before, but we convinced Governor Phil Bredesen to file the petition, which ended up, after 6 years of work, protecting 564 miles of ridgelines in the North Cumberland Mountains from mountaintop removal mining. When the petition passed from the Bredesen administration to the Haslam administration, there needed to be overwhelming public support for the petition to keep that EIS moving forward. and TCWP dominated the public hearings. I doubt seriously whether politically that would have survived without that support. That designation protected those mountains, but it also ended some coal jobs in a poor rural county. 10 years later, it's TCWP that's helping those counties develop the nature-based recreational economy that'll be their future, the Rails to Trails project we're working on right now. That's the importance. The final story starts in 1993, when a water supply dam was proposed in the headwaters of Clear Creek. That major tributary to the Obed. Bill Allen and Neil McBride at Rural Legal Services in Oak Ridge were the only people we knew that had a conference phone that we could use. So Lee and I went down there because we needed to call David Sievers over in the state to try to get him to recognize that they were about to impound water upstream from a designated wild river. They'd never done that before. They'd actually never done an EIS for a dam before, except on the main stream by TVA. So this was going to be unprecedented. We sat on the phone with the guy for a while, said, "We're not really asking for much, we just need you to do this study." He said, "Okay." They had no idea what they were getting into. Years of study, meetings with the utility districts, research, public hearings, left us still uncertain about what the state was going to do in relation to that project and whether they were going to allow that dam to impound the waters of the Obed Wild and Scenic River. TCWP dug in. We looked at every possible angle, and then we found some aerial photos in the TVA towers that proved that this was actually an attempt to get taxpayer funding for a residential development project instead of supplying water to a local deprived community, and that project went down. Today, a quarter of a century later, the threat of water robbing impoundments to the waters of the Obed is back, and TCWP is still here. Thanks to your participation and your support. We've been here before, and we intend to protect that river. Thanks for being here.
Okay, so I'm going to introduce our last official storyteller this morning, Chuck Estes. Now, besides being my very favorite cat herder, anytime there's a big project that looks completely unmanageable, he's your guy for cat herding. But he was also the second recipient of TCWP's Founders Award. Now, we started the Founders Award in 2024 and honored Jean Bingham. Jean was a founder. She was at the first meetings in August at Richard Lorenz's apartment, and she acted as the first treasurer of TCWP, charging all 33 people that had crammed into that apartment $1, thus making them the first members of TCWP. Unfortunately, she passed away about a month after we awarded her that. So then we decided from here on out we were going to award somebody the Founders Award. It would be someone who best reflects the vision Leanne Russell laid out in our Articles of Incorporation in 1966. If you've never read those, they were actually called charters in those days. We encourage you to read it. It's on our website, on the organization page, under articles. Read them. They're very unique, and the purpose serves us well today as a guidance for all of our work today. So I do want to read real quickly the award we gave to Chuck. It says, "We honor your tireless advocacy for the protection of wild lands and waters. Your commitment to imaginative planning, public education, and cooperative stewardship reflects the vision set forth in TCWP's charter and continues to guide our work today." Please help me welcome Chuck Estes.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Just wonderful to see a lot of familiar folks and some newer folks. So it's good everybody could make it out here. Wonderful celebration. As Jenny said, we have to do more of this. It's a great thing. I'll start off by saying when Lola and I first moved here in the 80s, I was looking for a place that I could expend some energy on environmental work that had done some good bit of stuff in Mississippi when we were down there. A tough environment to work in for the environment, I'll tell you. So we were hiking in the Smokies one weekend early on, up 20 Mile Creek Trail up to Shuckstack Fire Tower. And we make it to the fire tower. It's a long way up there. And we're hanging out at the fire tower and we're noticing this guy's coming up, kind of wiry looking guy, kind of dressed oddly to us. Not really like a typical hiker, funny hat, clothes. He got a little closer and we noticed he's got a pocket protector with pins in it and stuff. And like, I don't normally see anybody on the trail with stuff like that. And we kind of look at each other and gotta be from Oak Ridge. Gotta work at the National Lab. I mean, gotta be. Walks up and of course it's Charlie Kablundi, who was our longtime treasurer. And, you know, we chatted. We were fairly new to Oak Ridge, and Charlie tells us about TCWP and some things, and that was one of our earlier on introductions to the group. As I've expressed to Nancy in the past, the thing that really got me interested in not just the good work that TCWP had been doing was the people that made up the organization. Just a fabulous array of people. It's just typical Oak Ridge for us. We just couldn't believe this town that was made up of all this vast array of people with incredible science, physics, engineering backgrounds, and it was just a vibrant area and people to be involved with, and TCWP was another reflection of that. And the Russells in particular, with their scientific background, and everybody in the group that we were meeting had that kind of background. And that's something that really affected me, was if you look, for me anyway, my takeaway from early on with the group was, if you look at that group, the people that made that group up with their backgrounds and scientific foundation, what I was seeing was they were incorporating the scientific method that they were taught, that they were trained with, they used, to take that into the areas that we were fighting against some of these dams. I may be wrong, Jenny and others could probably tell me better about. My remembrance was the way TCWP, when they first organized, and the big fight was the Obed Dam and Big South Fork Dam. They basically used that scientific method to attack the cost-benefit analysis and destroyed the Corps' whole background or basis for doing the dam. That's my memory of it. And so that really impressed me and helped me form my own way of looking at and viewing these things, projects, problems, and how to approach it. And for me personally, that was very strong. I think it was in the late 90s. I worked through, I'm a passionate whitewater kayaker, and there's the Caney Fork River in a little bit further west of the Obed system was under attack by the city of Crossville. They wanted to build a dam to enlarge, I think it's Holiday Lake that they get the water from. And so I represented for TCWP and American Whitewater trying to fight that. And I used all those skills that I got from being on the board and being close to Lee and Bill and other members here to help fight against that. I could not have stood in front of the Crossville City Council and made the points that I made without that kind of background. And so that's one of the things I want to impart, is that this organization, it's in the DNA of this organization. We have a strong scientific background. When we talk, people know we're speaking the truth. We've investigated it, we've analyzed it, and it's an important voice that we can contribute to these issues. We have current, as Don was saying, new attacks on Daddy's Creek and some other creeks by the same watershed management people, exact same ones that I was working against on the Caney Fork, same group. So every 10 years or so, this pops up, and it's recurring again. And it's a great opportunity for our organization to speak yet again and to be clear, concise, get our message across. And the people, I know it's a very hard environment now. Politically, there's some things working against us, but our organization has been here for 60 years, holding the ground, standing up, and this is another opportunity. And we need to look at it as an opportunity in a way to keep pushing that message. And I just say, any of the people here, we've got a lot of longtime members, and we've got some young folks here. It's important to remember where we've been, but where we can go in the future. It's still out there. We're going to be a vibrant organization in the future. So, that's the lessons that I've learned from this organization, and it's been just, a wonderful opportunity to be with, meet, work with all of you, and we've got a strong future to look forward to, and that's the message I want to leave. Yeah. Yeah, I'll just say, I really enjoyed being around Frank. He was also into boating, kayaking up on the plateau, and we'd paddle together sometimes on a few of the streams. And he was one of the few, I always wondered, he had no fear to go out by himself. That's kind of a mantra among us whitewater boaters. You do not go by yourself. Boating, there's so many weird things that can happen to you if you don't have anybody to help. But Frank, it didn't matter to him. He'd take his bike and he'd boat and then bike back up to his car and go by himself on some of these excursions. He truly loved the area. And the other thing that inspired me about Frank was he was very involved in gaining some of the property up on the plateau. Some of you, it's a misconception. A lot of people think, oh, Obed Wild and Scenic River is set, it's there. Well, true enough, there's legislation, there are boundaries, but that doesn't mean all the property is taken care of. It could be legally within the Wild and Scenic River. And Frank was the one that inspired me to get involved in property, getting property for the Obed Wild and Scenic River. He did a huge amount of work working with property owners up there. He had a great way about him of speaking to people about it, and I took a lot of pointers off of him in the work I've been doing. So I really, really appreciate Frank's legacy. Yep.
Thanks, Jay. Yes, and-
So, yeah, I knew Frank just, personally, and, I know that he did an amazing amount of work for the organization, and he was just the salt of the earth. He was my mother's hiking companion, and they were very close. He used to take her after she could hardly walk anymore. He would take her on a little walk around my old elementary school, which had been razed to the ground. It was about a quarter of a mile from our house, and it was now a park. And Frank would walk her there when she, was going at a very slow pace with a walker for several years, I think, before she passed.
Oh, nice. Thank you. Jimmy Groton, yay.
And it's appropriate that this picture is here. Everybody that knows the Obed, knows Clear Creek, knows that this is the view from Lily Bluff. That's like the #1 view in the park, right? Right there is the second best view from the park. And Frank was instrumental in helping to acquire that land. What you don't realize is from here up is not in the designated area of the park. And some local people bought that property and decided they needed to sell it. And they went to Matt Hudson at the Park Service, and the park couldn't buy it because it wasn't in the boundary. And it takes an act of Congress to get a new boundary set to include those areas. Well, Matt set us up with the guys that own that property. They were stupid enough to show us an appraisal of the thing, which at that time it was about $3,000 an acre, which was not bad. But they offered it to us for $5 and said that they could get $6. But they were, wanted to do us a favor. And this was right about the time when the .com bubble burst. And so anyway, we made a copy of the appraisal, and then we went to work and started thinking about stuff and how we were going to do this and how we were going to do that. We were in a meeting with Nikki, the superintendent of the park, and somebody from one of your friends, Jenna, one of our friends, was at that meeting, and she contacted me later on, and she says she wanted to help. And I was like, well, we don't even have a plan yet. She goes, no, we want to buy it, but we don't want anybody to know who we are because we will never be able to do this again. So we got together with Gabby from the Nature Conservancy because they're better at handling that kind of stuff than we were. And Gabby took over the negotiations and made an offer that was about $3,000 an acre, and they said no. And then Gabby stayed in touch with the realtor, and over the next year, the realtor would, sometimes would call Gabby, sometimes Gabby would call her, but they were like, these folks are getting kind of desperate. They need the money. And so the upshot of that is that the Nature Conservancy, with this private donation, bought it for $2,750 an acre.
Wow.
And then held it until the park could draw a new boundary around it. And and protect that whole thing. So there's like a whole story there about Frank. That he had a way of ferreting out land. I don't know, I think he used to go to the courthouse and look at the tax maps. He was an amazing guy. He was an amazing mentor to me. He would come with a problem, he would tell you about this problem, and then he'd go, Jim, what are you going to do about that? It's like, jeez, Frank. And then he'd, go, it's kind of like in the movie Jeremiah Johnson, where Will Geer, the old seasoned mountain man, asked Jeremiah Johnson if he's ever skinned a grizzly bear. And he's just like, yeah. So he's like, okay, I'll go get one. And so a little while later, you hear this laughing and getting louder and louder and louder, and then this roaring behind him. And Will Geer jumps through the window of the cabin, and the bear comes in behind it. And then he goes back out the other window. He says, you skin that one, Pilgrim, and I'll go get us another one. That was Frank. He never stopped. And we loved him for it.
His determination that when she felt something was wrong, and all of us that we've talked about, that she took it upon herself to fight like heck to right the wrong. She called me one day when she was on 130 Tabor Road. She was a lot older then, losing her mobility a little bit. She called me, she goes, Jenny, you've got to help me. I said, well, of course, what do we need to do? She said, the city told me that I've got to trim the hemlocks along the sidewalk in front of my house. I said, okay, what do we need to do? She said, if I trim those hemlocks, it's gonna let in more sunlight than I want, and it's gonna not shield my house the way I'm accustomed to, and it's gonna kill those trees. We've got to stop this. I said, okay, I'll be over in a minute. So I went over, I said, Lee, what do we do? She goes, well, I want you to go out there and cut a branch off of the hemlock tree that nobody will notice that it's been cut, and cut a big one. I said, okay. So went out, cut a great big branch of the hemlock tree. Came in, she said, there's a planning meeting tonight of the planning council for city council. We're going to that meeting so I can plead my case. I said, okay. So I came back at 6:30 and loaded her in the car, her walker, and the hemlock branch in the back seat. We went down to the city offices. We find the room. Lee walks in, me behind her carrying that branch. It's the funniest thing. She talked and talked about why all the scientific reasons she could not have those hemlock trees trimmed. And I'm behind her going. She lost. They trimmed the trees. But they're still there, aren't they, Evie?
Yeah, a little scraggly.
Yeah. See, thanks for indulging me in that.
We were in Ontario or northern Maine, camping on a lake. It was a big lake, and we had parked on one side and canoed across and camped on the other side of this huge lake for, I don't know, a few days. And the day came to break camp, and there was a thunderstorm obviously looming on the other side of the lake. And Lee was deathly afraid of lightning, deathly afraid, from her childhood on. So she started to say, let's just stay here, and he was saying, let's go. He was normally the guy in charge of our vacations, so he was kind of figuring out how to get her to go, but she was not having it. She put her foot down. So voices were raised. He was making all these quick motions to uncamp, and she was reversing them with recamping. And at one point, she picked up a hatchet. It was sheathed, but she picked it up and she threw it in his general direction. It hit a tree, you know, at a safe distance from him. She was a horrible pitcher whenever we played softball at home. We never had her pitch because she was horrible. But she got this one to go exactly where she wanted it. It made the point. Something happened, I don't know. I was in shock.
But I don't have a story. I just want to tell you, I want to thank you. This has been so uplifting, and I am newly energized to continue this fight, because we're gonna have to do that.
Yes.
That it's very real. They're out there trying to plan to install a dam on one of these tributaries. So thank you so much, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Oh, thank you. By next year, 2 of our current partners in protection have suggested we start holding an annual fun event just for the partners in protection, like barbecue, potluck, hiking, paddling. But the important part would be getting to know one another better, ensuring that we keep this community strong for the next 60 years. So folks, thank you so very much for helping us celebrate this important time in our organization, and for helping us build another 60 years together. Thank you.